Welcome back to Linux Gameplay Performance. Today we're looking at ARC Raiders during the free Server Slam weekend. Extraction shooters aren't really my jam, but just like it was the case with Dune Awakening, when it's free I'm happy to take a look for testing. So today we're going through the usual spiel of playing the game, testing the individual preset performances and comparing the visual differences using screenshots. I've also revised the format of this video to not follow a let's play style, but rely on narration instead. I wanted to start testing this format with Assassin's Creed Shadows, but I didn't know about the free Server Slam weekend for ARC Raiders, so here we are squeezing this in. As far as I'm aware, the free weekend is only on Epic's Game Store. Therefore, I'm using the Heroic launcher and the latest Proton GE version 10.20. Generally, the game just launches. The only strange thing I noticed during the first boot was a ton of path not found error boxes, which I've also seen when testing other games on Heroic. But it's enough to dismiss them all and start the game a second time. From then on, it'll just work as if nothing had ever happened. ARC Raiders is yet another Unreal Engine 5 game this year, and as such, the settings menu is very familiar. The two standout features were a separate setting for RTX global illumination and a slider for custom adjustments of the TSR upscaling level. I love that. In terms of presets, there are low, medium, high and epic, and they behave similarly to those in many other UE5 titles. A very cool feature of the settings menu is how it overlays itself over the live gameplay, and you can immediately see the impact on visuals and performance. I only wish you could disable the giant tooltips. Maybe you can somewhere else, but I haven't looked for it, to be honest. The tutorial section is not indicative of the actual game performance. It runs much better than the big maps you'll explore once you're past the tutorial. What you're seeing in the background are epic settings and full-blown RTX GI, no upscaling. But don't worry, we'll review all presets individually next. The low preset really looks low quality, mainly the foliage in the distance takes a hit. It runs very well though, with around 200 FPS in this early scene, and could even be desirable for real competitive gameplay. It might make enemies easier to spot. Because the image was very unattractive, I quickly switched to the medium preset. The medium preset starts to look presentable as it bumps up the foliage quality to appear less like an artistic aquarelle painting. The environment also gets more detail, which helps with the presentation. In a dumb move, I also enabled RTX GI on low quality, but performance is still very high, over 120 frames per second.
Elevator. Go ahead, Radeon. The elevator is ready.
With high, I also made the same quote-unquote mistake I made with medium. I increased the RTX GI quality to high to match. Yes, I should have also set GI to medium at the medium preset, but I only realized that after the fact and was too lazy to re-record it. This sequence also shows some unusual hitching, which I don't think is related to the game performance. It felt more like rubber banding because of server connection speeds or latency. Despite the settings, I think performance is still reasonable. It fluctuates between 80 and 90 frames per second even when overlooking the map from a high building or when exerting rage against the machine. Although the Epic preset looks excellent, it also wastes a lot of performance. In this instance, the culprit is the Epic RTX Global Illumination though. But even if you lower the GI quality, I would also adjust the other settings, and we'll get to that next. Unfortunately, this preset is not only too much for high frame rates, it's also too much for the RX 9070 XT to run the game and simultaneously record at 60 FPS, at least early in the footage, which appears worse than 40 FPS would suggest otherwise. I'll address that more in my Assassin's Creed Shadows video. Since this isn't really playable and I died early, we'll move right on to looking at upscaling. In the first test, we're still seeing all settings on Epic, even RTX GI, and I only enabled TSR with a scaling factor of 80%. This level of upscaling elevates the frame rate above 60 FPS, which would be at a playable level. However, in a game like this, you probably prefer a higher frame rate. Therefore, lowering the RTX GI to just high, with everything else still being on Epic and setting TSR to 80% feels very good. In a brief test, I also enabled FSR3 quality. I think it has some positive effects on the image while being worse at others. I'd call it playable, but there is a better alternative, which is Unreal's TSR, and its core benefit is allowing a custom scaling factor.
at the central swamp lift.
As an Unreal Engine 5 title, I enabled what I generally refer to as the sweet spot for this engine. Start with the high preset and bump up the view distance, texture and global illumination detail. Maybe even the foliage. Don't confuse Lumen GI with the RTX GI setting. That I also set too high. Lastly, I switched back to TSR at 80% upscaling. This yielded a high refresh rate experience and good visuals. I wasn't aware that Arc Raiders was based on Epic's Unreal Engine 5. I only noticed this when looking at the graphics options. While there are reasons to lament this fact, it's also almost a guarantee that it'll run well on Linux. I believe all UE5 games I looked at this year just worked, and compared to Windows, the performance was usually only around 10 frames per second lower, depending on the scene and preset. As I've shown, Arc Raiders runs very well on Linux, so who cares about Windows? Jokes aside, I won't do any comparisons to Windows 11. The nature of this game is too volatile, making it challenging to establish repeatable conditions for quote-unquote scientific performance testing. I also don't care enough about Arc Raiders, if I'm honest. I had fun testing the presets and creating the video, but I don't see myself playing it. And again, it runs so well that a comparison to Windows is just for clicks. And I think the good performance comes down to Embark Studios making a couple of smart decisions that don't push all the settings to their maximum maximum, even though there's a dedicated RTX GI option. I'll leave it to Digital Foundry to discover the details and impact of this technology. I'm just here for the Linux performance. A good example of smart tuning is texture quality. I only saw the VRAM usage go barely above 8 GB, so 12 GB cards like the RTX 5070 should be fine. Even lower end models with only 8 GB can work with a few tweaks to the settings. The terrain detail is another setting that appeared very high and dense, but looking closer at the smaller rocks on the ground showed how coarse they were. It gave an impression of a lot of detail, and only on closer scrutiny did the illusion fade and reveal the junkiness. The game also heavily relies on screen space effects besides reflections. Moving through the world, you may notice shadows popping in on the edges of the screen as objects become visible, or when some objects occlude the background, like this tree. Nevertheless, the game is attractive, and being an online competitive shooter, performance is more important than all the visual bells and whistles. And that is all I have for you today. Please consider doing all the YouTube stuff while ignoring the thumbs down button, or press it at least twice for greater effect. Also, please share your thoughts on how you like this revised format in the comments. I'd appreciate that. Thank you for watching.